Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to our first reaction stream on LinkedIn.
Is it the first one?
I think it's the first one. We had a reaction stream on YouTube, we had a reaction stream on other media, but I think this is the first one where we get to talk about what's going on LinkedIn, particularly in our network, because pretty much that's all we see. How are you doing, Adrian?
Fine. And you?
Cool.
Good. So,
How's
interestingly, it is like you said LinkedIn, and lately there is not so much going on anymore on LinkedIn as it was for my feed, this month ago. So it feels a little bit empty. So what I see more is people posting more Twitter-like content and less sophisticated content where you actually learn something from it. There are more engineers now talking about things like Brian, Andrea L, and those kind of guys. But in general, it seems like the creators from last year to the same time aren't active anymore. Not that much. That's something I see in my feed. Is it the same in yours, or do you think it's not that case?
Well, I think I see evidence of that, but not on LinkedIn. I look at out of the content creator Slacks that have 400 members, and 3 of them are active. Right? So I think it's just a seasonal thing that it'll just trend up and down, and it migrates from LinkedIn to Substack to Twitch and back to LinkedIn to Mastodon and then to YouTube and then back to LinkedIn and then back to
Is Mastodon a thing?
Yeah, I think everybody who exited Twitter is on Mastodon, I would say, or Blue Sky.
Really?
That market is also very fragmented, yeah. But I'm not keeping up on like who's there, but I know that it's going on because I am getting pinged. So today, you picked a few articles. Which one of the ones that you picked do you want to start with?
Let's take a look what you have picked, actually.
Okay. One of my favorites was
pair programming.
Yeah, the one that I picked that I really liked to cover was the pair programming one.
I just see that we have an overlap. The sender one I picked as well, but the version Andrea L was actually reposting. Just seeing that.
So I'm just gonna share my link real quick. Share my screen. Share that window instead of this one. Okay. So this one, Tim asked if pair programming and teaming is so great, why aren't more big companies doing it? Coding, and it sparked off a long discussion about essentially people will work solo if you're being if working in pairs is stigmatized, right? So if collaboration is fine as long as it's not 2 people on the same task, but then it begs the question, what does collaboration mean, right? So does collaboration mean that we have one kitchen, one restaurant, and you serve my table and I serve I serve my table and you serve your table? Is that collaboration?
No, that's parallelization.
Right, but then that's not collaboration, right? So it's an interesting thought experiment. What stood out to me is the comments, right? So this thread is still going even today. This thread is alive, and this is from 1 week ago.
A week ago, yeah.
Yeah, so it's really active. What are your thoughts on this? Without going too much into detail on all of the responses, because they are being filtered based on my network. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, can you scroll up again, please, to the start, that everyone can see the actual topic? So if pair programming and teaming are so great, why aren't more big companies actually doing it? Easy, people will continue working solo as long as working together is viewed as a suspicious activity. Yeah, so that's a little bit that's even a non-tech driven thing. So that's basically in most company on the planet the case where this typical traditional behavior that people shouldn't stand together and talk. It's a sign that they're actually not working. In my opinion, the tech space, especially the development space, is not that immature. So I don't have the feeling that I know companies where people actually think this, because even the employing persons are often tech persons as well, and they know and understand that people need to talk about this. So I personally think that this is a good hook for a discussion, but it is not really a thing. So I never saw that kind of problem out there. For me personally, what I see out there is pair programming is actually more. So why pair programming isn't done is more a problem of the developers and not of the employers. So if the employers would get told that we can be more effective when we work from time to time together, then they would say, okay, let's try this. But most of the developers simply don't want to do this because of many reasons, actually. I wasn't scrolling through the entire comments. Do you have some specific comments in mind where we can talk about?
I mean, the camp seemed to split in some people don't like to, and then there's the one that I also commented on, which is incentive driven. So people will be incentivized to work in whatever agrees with their incentive structure. There are then those who are pro solo work, pro deep work, right? So if I have to talk with somebody, then I can't do deep work, which is complete nonsense. At least that was disproven, right? So, and then there's the whole aspect of some people don't want to, some people see it as an invasion of their privacy.
Yeah, that's the number one reason.
Yeah.
That's the number one reason I know, because people tend to try to not get into, let's say, not be too transparent with their work towards their peers, and especially towards the people who will review them. So they try to keep that as low as possible. So stay under the radar and not tell everyone, hey, I'm having these and that problems or that kind of problems. So the people might see the downside. So when I take a look at mentoring, most and even engineering managers up to staff engineers have the same problem, that they don't want to show their current downsides to their colleagues. So this is, I think, the number one reason why people don't tend to do pair programming, especially in larger organizations. So it might be if you are just a 2-people team and you know each other for 5 years, it's less of a problem to do that. But if you are a large team with a lot of fluctuation, the tendency to be resistant to pair programming is actually quite higher.
What's your default?
Pair programming or not, or you mean?
Yeah, like for your work, for your teams, for your when you have organizational power.
Pair programming is a tool we use. It is not a default, like, hey, we only have pairs who are actually programmed. That's not how we do that. But pair programming is basically the review process we use. So we don't have code reviews. We don't do that. That's nonsense. But that's next
That's the next topic. Yeah.
So we are not an open source company, and but we still want to talk about things. And so we often talk before we actually do things and after we have done things. What we're actually not doing that much is the typical pair programming. It is like we are not, this is the typical thing then. You do the programming, I do the telling, and then I do the telling, you do the typing. This is not how we actually do that. It is more like, hey, it is your task, and I'm sitting together with you, and we're just chatting about what you actually do there. But it is most of the time when either the work is about to start, or it's actually ending. But it's in between. We tend to not do that because of the structure we are, right? We need to be fast. We need to do things, and we have a lot going on at the same time. That's our circumstance. No. And well, how's about you? So you are actually a coach in that area. So how do you see that out there when you read this? Is it actually reflecting what you know, or who is actually pro and against pair programming at the coachees you had in the past?
I mean, from the coaching part of my experience, I would say it's usually developers who don't want to pair. But not because, but it's twofold. One of them just don't want to because they're not used to it. But the vast majority is they don't want to because they think it might be looked down upon. They think that it is suspicious behavior. So I agree here with Tim's, and that comes from incentives, right? So that comes from management. Now, personally, when I was still, a contributor, tech lead, etc., architect, my default was pairing, actually. Right? So me working alone was the anomaly. So I would have to explicitly call out that, hey, I don't have a pairing partner. I'm working alone today.
Yeah.
That would be like a very rare, sort of undesirable outcome to my work, just because I was working way too closely with. I was working in a domain that was too complex for me to keep track of in my head, and it didn't warrant documentation to the degree that we would want to plan so much ahead, right? So it was a more extreme agile, extreme programming style of agile, and pairing with someone was much faster than them drawing up specs for the sole purpose of me reading them, and then me writing code based on the specs, and then me going back to review my output. It was just, like, if nobody else is reading it, just instead of creating the document, just sit with me, and then I'll code as you explain it to me, and then we can pair, and then I can sort of bounce ideas back and forth with you, and I can sort of focus our area of inquiry towards what I'm actually planning on coding and deploying and testing and reasoning about, and not speculating about wider architecture, right? So
yeah, that's very
because those documents have to have a sense. Like, you can't just jump into the middle of it. Those documents generally establish context, and then people go into essay mode on those docs. Anyway, but that's more documentation specific. My default is definitely pairing. I was pairing when the organization considered it suspicious. I was pairing when I needed help. I was pairing when I was a junior. I was pairing when I was a tech lead. I was pairing when I was an architect. I was pairing when now as a coach, even sometimes I offer pairing as my services, as a sort of more pairing style of teaching. But my ideal setup is ensembling, actually. So when I have full freedom, I actually but this was almost 10 years ago now. And my main example from that is from me working in office with a team that is in office, which is rare nowadays. So one of the conditions for that is that I had full control over the table space. So that I could set up monitor here, table there, chair here, projector there, 2 keyboards, 2 monitors, right? So I could set up the ensembling setup. That was very powerful. That was very important. Like that, you called a meeting and it was obvious that instead of the meeting room, we're going to the ensembling room. It was very obvious that it's going to be a working meeting. Like, as we're talking, somebody's writing code. Like, rather than taking notes, somebody's writing code. And that's very powerful. Like, that is by far the best way of collaborating with your peers and with your stakeholders and with your domain people.
Yeah, definitely. I get the stuff
and
done.
I'm aware.
Yeah,
and I'm aware that this is odd for a lot of people. This is like a weird way of writing software.
Actually, is the most straightforward way to do that.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And somehow, I think it is the big inconvenience of the developers out there that they are mostly in an environment which they don't want to be in, actually. It is this typical toxic thing where everyone tries to keep his position, because we're living in a time where, your position as a developer is quite valuable, because many people, or most developers, not most, but many developers right now don't have a position and they have problems getting into. So there's a lot of anxiety to actually lose a job. So you try to look as good as possible, and sharing all your downsides is, I think, something you try to avoid, um, just as a basic instinct. But actually, it is vice versa. So the more you actually show about your own downsides, the more you show that you care about improving them, right? And or improve on them. And that is something many people are afraid of. And it is literally one of the, let's say, when it's come, let's say, not to engineering managers but to engineers in terms of mentoring and coaching, that is one of the number one fears that people have. So how can I prepare for, I just made a video about that. It is like communication, it is the negatives that compound. So you basically try, it is not even the pair programming, it is the communication in general. So one of the reasons why people like it to have their hidden branches for a week where they can just do their stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And not do anything regarding communication. But then, because no, not because, but they basically handle their own communication inside the company, feedback about them the same way, which means that that the negative aspects about that developer actually compounding, which means that other people already have negative opinions about you, and the more they compound, the more negative you will be seen. It is not the same with the positives, it is only with the negatives. And that is one of the big problems why people then have saying that I have actually this feedback meeting and I'm not sure about if my work is actually a good one or not. And let's be honest, how can you know if you don't ask for it, right? And you need to go into conversations. You need in a pair programming session, right? And even if it's just a collaboration session, not a pair programming by book, right? Then you still get a lot of feedback from your peers. You know what's going on. You sense that. People can sense that. But if you really try to avoid that, you will never know. And then you are always afraid to actually go into a real conversation because there is too much at the same time. Yeah, actually compounded, over time, for you to handle in that moment, which creates this big anxiety.
Yeah.
Not good.
Are ready for our next topic?
Yeah, is that not a little bit too big? It's a little bit big, but yeah, let's go with that today. Okay. Yeah, that's actually what I shared. So I shared the repost of Andrea, which was actually.
It's here. It's here. Just let me click it.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it is about this topic, so it's not that like.
But he posted it. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's in a very interesting article. We were with Sander Hugendorn already on live stream, and I think that was one of the topics as well. And it was our big first topic in our tech journey stream in general.
Yeah.
So avoid pull requests and code reviews, and I still think that is one of the most important topics. So basically, Andrea was writing about that as well, and I see the tendency in the extreme programming space, the people who do continuous delivery are actually people who try to avoid pull requests naturally, because if you want to deliver every day something, then you can't have 10 pull requests a day to review. So you actually need, especially not asynchronous, you need to get this stuff done as soon as possible. And you need to get things out there, and not everything needs to be reviewed, and you should be mature enough to actually think. But let's go, and I would recommend, can you go through the post, and let's dig a little bit deeper into that, because it's actually an interesting thing to talk about directly.
So I also met Sander on How to Web last year. I met him in person. We shared the stage, and he was on our stream as well. Great guy, serial CDO, very serious agilist, very serious extreme programming enthusiast. What should we focus on? Yeah, so the mechanics are simple. You have a branch. You open a request for somebody to pull your branch and merge it into their branch. Like, that's a pull request. That's how it was named. It's a pull operation opposed to a push operation. So I cannot push commits into your branch. I request for you to pull from mine, right? So it's this sort of inversion of accountability approach, and usually it forces two people to talk to each other to move a commit from one branch to another. It has been popularized through feature branching.
In open source.
No, so it has been popularized through feature branching. So pull requests actually weren't popular in open source. They became popular when they got popularized for feature branching. During Subversion times, when Git wasn't that popular, branches were really expensive, and then nobody was doing pull requests because nobody was doing branching.
Most people weren't do branches at all, so it's like
Yeah.
they weren't
And
invented, of course, but
even in environments where there were pull requests, they weren't pull requests. They were basically reviewing diffs, right? So you were more prone to diff stacking rather than pull requests, and that's the whole CVS era. Like that's the whole mess from the Linux kernel, because that was back then that was the biggest open source project that needed this problem solved, which is why Linus Torvalds basically implemented his own version control system, which is Git. But it is, I think, it does draw inspiration from all of the other version control systems that did exist at the time, particularly when it comes to branching and performance. So Sander talks about pull requests. It's like, yeah, on the surface, it makes sense. Why wouldn't we do this? And pull requests are the perfect antidote for when you don't trust people with right access into your code base. Like that's the sort of baseline that he's coming, and that's already touching on the edge of controversy, right? So that like my main objection to pull requests is its dominant use in what should be high trust organizations, right? So a team of 6 should trust each other's contributions. This idea that a senior engineer can trust what a junior engineer is doing, that's silly. That's a very weird way of looking about code contributions.
Yeah, it is a little bit like if not 2 people have reviewed the code, you are not allowed to deploy. So there's totally contextless of what you actually deploy there, and especially in a small batch environment where you do very small changes and you try to get them out as soon as possible. You need to become a mature person to determine if that change is actually something you need a second pair of eyes to actually go through. When I see into my work, the peers would be totally pissed off actually when you ask him every 5 minutes about can you review that, and they would ask, man, you're doing that for so many years, you know that you can push it like that. And that's the kind of maturity you should have as a team. So as soon as you go into a architectural change, as soon as you change something which will change the work of other subsystems you might not own in that company or in the team or something like that, where clear boundaries are, you need to discuss something, or maybe you need to get some feedback upfront or after. That how shall we actually implement this? We had that today. We were implementing a new geocoding API from Mapbox because we want to go away from the demo APIs from OpenStreetMaps and ORSRM and stuff like that. And we were discussing that today. So we have 2 layers where we can do that, Next.js and Nest.js. And there are pros and cons for both of them. And we were discussing that several times before we actually implement it. Then we have written down the specs we defined for us, and then now we start to implement this. So this is the way how we do that. No one needs to ask someone to actually review the code. There is no need, absolutely no need. And if you need to review someone's code because you don't trust the people to actually create code that is viable to go to production, and please train or fire these people. Because they are not adequate enough to actually take part in that team. So, for example, junior developers, we had that in the past as well. You can let junior developers push to production as long as they understand what they are allowed to push to production. And you have tested code, of course, which means that if a junior developer is capable of doing some HTML, CSS changes, then this person is allowed to do that. Just do that. So if the person will understand if something goes wrong, so the damage is actually not high, so you actually can
Mm-hmm.
mitigate that quite fast. But for that person, it's a very good negative feedback, which the person can build up on, and the chance that it will happen again is lower, aka maturity plus plus,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what we need to aim for. And I think that is a little bit what Sander is here telling us well with other words. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it goes
Well,
into the right
well,
direction.
well, he fragmented up the post in a few areas, right? So the origins, the mechanics, and then starting with trust, right? So I have a great anecdote on this as well. When I enforced reviews as a tech lead for database changes, for when for incident response, like adding an index, for example, or doing or that's that's easy to standardize. What's a little bit harder is installing an extension on AWS RDS, for example, right? A Postgres extension, like installing it, because most migration tools don't support that. Um, so I always said I want to pair with somebody when I'm doing that, not because I don't trust them or they don't trust me. It's just that it's an environment, it's a live hot environment, and I don't trust myself not to make a mistake. Right? So I'm aware that if I'm juggling way too many things at the same time, I would much rather have a second pair of eyes looking at what I'm typing as I'm typing. There still is transactional safety and everything, but that's a very good example of, yeah, you know what? It's not about trust, about me trusting you or somebody gatekeeping. It's just that I feel like the quality of my work is higher if we have two people here at the same time, right? So I'm optimizing for quality. Like I want to get it right the first time. The chance of that is 96% if I'm working alone, and it's 99% if there's two of us. I'll take the 99, right? Like that's the decision making process there. A junior would think about it differently, right? But I wouldn't enforce, go do changes to, I don't know, your VPC mesh alone, and then me empowering you to do so when you're not properly trained. No, the idea is that you are properly trained already before you get access to that.
I
Um,
completely refactored the infrastructure's code document, but I actually don't know about that, but I'm allowed to push, so I've done it.
yeah, but I'm yeah.
I
So
went
that's
home, right?
yeah, yeah.
So there were
That's good.
actually no tests running, so I think it's good because
Mm.
the tests are not in part of the infrastructure's code anymore, right? No,
so
that's negative example. You
so
shouldn't do that. So
yes,
there are yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so there's an example that has to do with trust, but not that transactional trust of I don't trust you, don't trust me, so I review your code, you review my code. I think that's silly. What's you know my inherent gripe with and the reason we're mentioning it together in tandem with pairing, which is why we started with the pairing discussion, is because um, pull requests dominate the space in organizations where pairing doesn't happen, right? So people who don't pair, they're like, well, of course you do pull requests. What else would you do? And they don't see the tangent between pairing and pull requests and code review, because I don't want. I also don't like this terminology of code review. But then, if I say I think code reviews are stupid, like without context, we can get into a whole bunch of like rage bait on LinkedIn. What I mean is that so and I see this a lot when I'm coaching, is that code that was developed by two brains is a lot better than a code that was developed by one brain. Now, that only comes from pair programming. That
Not
that
from
can
review. Not from
exactly
reviewing. Yeah.
exactly because a code that was designed and developed and discussed with two brains as it was shaped is very different from code that was developed by one brain solo, and then it was reviewed by another brain solo,
Yeah.
and then it was either deployed or fixed or whatever happened again solo. Right, so that's my contrast, and it's very difficult to get across. Martin Fowler and Kent Beck nowadays mention this desert versus forest metaphor, right? So pairing is in the forest camp. It's in the abundance camp. Like it's the pairing and pull requests are in the land of possibility. Like, of course it's possible. Like, how does that help us? Oh, yeah, that helps us. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it more often. Let's do it a little bit less often. Whereas if you're in the desert and you're stressed out, you're always rushing, you don't have time for anything except the most urgent, like, nobody can get your attention unless it's on fire, right? In that kind of environment, you don't talk about it in these terms. You talk about it in the terms of, oh, I can't pair because it's too time consuming. Like, why are we optimizing for time? The software will be in maintenance mode most of the time. And if it's badly written, it'll become hard to maintain legacy code. And there's research on this, most hard to maintain legacy code is in such a state from commit 1. It wasn't very good and then it deteriorated, but it was created badly from the first commit while it was still on the feature branch. And the longer it stays on a long-lived feature branch, the more we know from research, from studies, that such code is going to be extremely expensive to maintain. That is what we should be optimizing to avoid, not the initial like small time investments of like, how do we optimize keyboard strokes on like a work week. So that's my point. Like, code developed by 2 brains or more brains as it's being created is much more efficient to maintain and sort of keep on into the future, compared to code that wasn't built that way. That was built solo in like high focus mode, with the exception of code that you will throw away next week. Then of course you don't need to hyper optimize for maintainability, right? So, but then I would also wager that if you're gonna throw it away next week, then it might not, then maybe that's commodity software and you should be using some low code solution or something else, or a product at the very least.
So since we are reacting today, I think that this topic today or this year is somehow more prominent than it was when we actually talked about that. And we have already discussed that, so maybe we had some influence in the past year actually on LinkedIn, and it sank in, but others had that already before because, there are some blog articles, of course, which are way older than us. Not us, but another topic we had about that. And I think that since LinkedIn is actually more a kind of professional network, it is slowly but steady moving its tendency to stick to a specific context. So, for example, in the last year, especially in the last half of the last year, I saw a lot against TDD. There was a big movement against TDD. This year I see more movement for TDD. It is a little bit like who is currently pushing forward. And it seems like that when you see a lot of things on LinkedIn, then which are going into a specific direction, you try to not be against that, because I think it's because of the nature of LinkedIn. Since it's a professional network, you have stakes there. You are there with your private name, so it's you as a person, not an alias or something like that. So it is less likely that you actually try to fight against most people, and so we have always some kind of dominant topic out there. And I remember when we were first going with that, we needed to convince everyone to going with that. And now I see a lot of comments, like we say James Burney, someone there, who is actually actually pro for that, or it seems like he is. And I saw that now quite a lot. And when I remember the first time I posted about, I remember the title, Avoid Pull Requests and Code Reviews. I posted it in a Slack group of engineering managers, and they were raging. Really raging. They were really like, you can't do that. This is like you lose so much of your training processes, of knowledge share, and all those kind of things. So it is a little bit like, hey, it is the idea. There was the big idea, and still the big idea, that a team of 5 to 10 people, they basically share knowledge in between each of one. But in reality, no one is reading the tickets of the other persons. They all have no time to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to highlight the comment actually, because we are getting into the law of raspberry
Can
jam
you
section and timeliness.
can you zoom in a little bit?
I'll read it out loud. I don't think
Okay.
it zooms. I don't think it zooms. If I zoom in more, I lose the comments. I can't focus on that part of the screen, unfortunately. But I will read it. So, Petro Koryanev, um, who does or doesn't work at Facebook. I'm not sure that's a legit account, but let's assume he works for Facebook. I'll check real quick. Yeah, it seems legit. Looks legit. Yeah, I think. What if you flip the sentiment from "we don't trust humans on our teams" to "humans on our teams don't trust themselves and automation to make changes"? That's an interesting thought experiment. But this part I disagree with very heavily. While automation is indeed helpful to prevent inadvertent mistakes, it'll never be able to catch it all, and sometimes an experienced human with right context is key to prevent bad issues from happening to prod. Code reviews are a great tool for learning and decreasing your productivity issues, even if your tolerance for them is high.
So the first paragraph is about someone who's actually checking if something is allowed to go to production.
Human inspection versus automatic inspection, yes. Machine inspection, yeah.
But that's a defect in your team.
Exactly, and I agree with this. And I think his argument for having a human along is a good argument for pairing and not for code reviews, right? Because look at it this way, because, you know what surprised me? Hang on. I have too many thoughts and tangents in my mind right now. First things first. What do I think? I think if you need a human along, then you should have the human along when you're creating the code, not when it's already done. Right? So if you need that experienced person to catch something, have them at the earliest possible moment, not at code review. At code review, it's damage is already done, and we're expecting, right? So it involves sort of timeliness, like it just pushes out the time till value horizon into the future, and it's quite, the economics of it are questionable. Like, yes, it took longer and it took later. Did we make an improvement? That's my first comment. My second comment is that, let's say, sometimes an experienced human with the right context is key. This implies that the code is being developed by an inexperienced human, or at least by an experienced human who doesn't have the right context. But that analysis fails if you look at it from the entire organization. That experienced human only has a certain amount of throughput. They can only review so many things. So if there are more, let's call them juniors, creating code that an experienced human needs to gatekeep, then the experienced human is the bottleneck. So the experienced human can only deliver as much code as an experienced human can review.
Yeah.
So you're wasting all of those junior people's times, or by instead of playing like some weird game of catch up where they burst out a lot of code and then you stop them with meetings, and then they burst out a lot of code and you stop them with meetings, and then you sort of do this rushing expedited reviews to sort of clear the feature branches, right? Like for this argument, like for the argument of, yeah, sometimes I don't trust myself not to make a mistake, so I want a second pair of eyes. I completely agree with that. Petro, if you're watching, I don't think he's watching because this is sort of pulled out of the blue from Sanders' thread, not from our audience. But I would say, yes, if you need this experienced human with the right context, involve him while you're writing the code, right? Otherwise, you're creating the bottleneck. And Sander talks about this a lot. He says it's actually Jerry Weinberg's law of raspberry, right? So you have X amount of people you don't trust and X amount of people you do trust. If the people you hire that you don't trust exceeds the amount of people you do trust, if the people you trust have to do pull requests and gatekeeping through code reviews, then they are the bottleneck, not the engineers that you don't trust, right? So the engineers you do trust are the bottleneck, because you have now, rather than them doing work, all the work is being done by the people who you don't trust, and you have, rather than working on solutions, you have the people you do trust reviewing code that was already written. By the time they review it, it was already written by the people you don't trust, which is a huge waste of time. You're basically throwing 90% of your productivity through the window by doing that, right? So a lot of teams deliberately stay lean because of that. We have 6 seniors, 4 juniors. That's all we can handle. Like, it's a high trust environment. Let's stay at that scale. And Sander talks about this a lot. He says, let's step back from open source. We have 15 people with varying experiences, backgrounds, and knowledge of different programming languages. Some have decades, and some have 2 years. We're a relatively small team, and they can maintain over 150 repositories, one for each microservice, and they often engage in knowledge, weekly knowledge sharing sessions. They work together, they pair, they mob, they have CI/CD pipelines, they do TDD.
Can you scroll up, please? Because that was one sent. I was missing that one. We standardize our software architecture and layers patterns. Can we 150 repositories? Understand? Where have you read microservices, or were you just saying that?
I know Sander. He mentioned it on his podcast when he worked with us, right? So I know that they're doing
this, because that is another thing we can transition to as a topic, which is the architectural part. So there is another big thing. When I started with LinkedIn 2 years or something ago, there was this typical discussion: microservices versus monolith. And it was actually in the favor of microservices to that time. It was 2.5 years ago. So people were all about microservices everywhere. Everyone was talking about and writing about microservices. It was a trendy thing. It was like together with micro front ends at the time.
That's still happening. I think that's still happening.
And then we had last year this big counter push of everyone saying, "Oh, don't do that. You mess up everything. Go for the modular monolith." And there was this big fight between the modular monolith, which is not a monolith, and the microservice system. And of course the big ball of mud version, which is the non-modular one, which is the other one you shouldn't avoid, and everyone is agreeing on that. So that is something very interesting as well. And what I want to tell here right now is the interesting aspect that the actual people who are really building something all have the tendency to go into services, and they have less the idea of, hey, let's build everything into one thing. And I see, and that's a LinkedIn thing. I'm pretty sure it is one. It is this idea of everyone pushing towards a modular monolith. It's a little bit of the coaching kind of thing, because it feels a little bit like, hey, I give you something, you can start easily with a company, and I promise, because it's modular, you can easily move into a microservice area, which isn't the case. And it is...
Hold on. Just to answer Kaluan's question as well, the article says multiple repositories, we're assuming microservices. No, I'm not assuming. I spoke to Sander. I know they're microservices, which is why I mentioned to highlight the conversation.
What I want to say by that is, as soon as you are in a real environment where you need to create real products for real customers, especially in the B2B area, you are very, very, very quickly going into the idea of actually writing services instead of writing a modular thing. And the modular thing is the idea of the beginning startup. The problem is, if you stay on that idea, you are actually a broken company, because you need to outgrow this state very early on in your career, in your lifetime as a company. Otherwise, you will break as a company. So that is why so many companies actually break. Is because they stay in this starting momentum, not to move anywhere into a more sophisticated technological environment. And that is what we see. That is what basically cost us so much money in the past, when we basically stuck to the idea of keep it simple. Keep it simple doesn't mean to actually have something which looks simple. It is actually it is a little bit more complicated to keep things simple.
Simple doesn't mean cheap.
Exactly.
Simple means quick to change, right? So, what we want is time to value, as one of the commenters on Sander's post says, right? We want time to value to remain flexible as the company grows, right? So,
and what I want to say by that is actually, and that is a concern I really saw last year. I'm looking forward to see a better year this year, but on LinkedIn, I saw way too many people formed their content to actually sell their product. It's their consulting.
Oh, hang on, you keep referring to posts. Put one of the posts on screen.
I don't have one. I don't have one right
Okay,
now.
okay, okay.
And you know, LinkedIn, I can't find anything from
Yeah,
my own account 1 week ago.
honestly,
Yeah.
that was one of the main reasons. That was one of the main reasons why I wanted to have these episodes, because I wanted us to highlight. I wanted us to highlight this idea that like there are some very valuable posts. Let's talk about them, so that at the very least we can, we can find them in the future, because it's impossible to find anything.
Yeah, but
on
they're
LinkedIn.
from last year, so this is the reason why I'm hoping that this year it becomes a little bit better, because it became a little bit annoying to see people contextless telling you need to go with a modular monolith. It is like monolith, just be modular, and you can always. It is so. It is so. I want to use bad words, but it is so short-sighted in that moment. It is not really telling anything about the next 5 years of your development. It is not telling anything about the cost you will have. And this is a phenomenon I see in many spaces of LinkedIn. And I had a bonus thing sent to you, a link of a German influencer. Actually, he's a person. I know someone who's actually working for him. He has 1,000 employees and is doing some food company thing, and he's actually posting different things. But
can you summarize the idea? Like, what was his point?
his point was, before you actually start to become a person on places like LinkedIn, you should have earned some visible credibility before you actually start doing things. And in the first moment, I was a little bit like, actually, I don't think, but then I came to the conclusion, very specific people who are actually try to shortcut let's say the ways companies take, should be actually having something done themselves already. So I wouldn't go out there and try to sell anyone a solution if I wouldn't, went through all that already myself. Because how should I know if that is actually a good idea or not, just because I have read it somewhere, or that might be a new thing. So that is the reason why I personally only talk about things which are actually something I have already done. Basically, Brian Finster said the same in the last conversation we had together, that he's only talking about things he already did, and you can read about those, for time and time. You see people approving that. And this is, in that case, when you act like a person, like a fractional CTO, a coaching person, in my opinion, you should be able to do that. And that is one specific thing I saw in this typical modular monolith versus microservice thing. No one actually said, I have done it already that way. It wasn't working. They all say, you will fail because of blah, 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 streamlined answer, right? And that is what I don't like. I don't want to see those posts. I won't support those posts anymore if someone asks me, because they're shallow. It's like people try to become an entrepreneur on LinkedIn themselves just because of LinkedIn. And it is a typical thing with the people telling you, hey, create videos, because creating videos is a great thing to do. By the way, I help creating videos. So that is actually the only way how you can actually earn money with LinkedIn. Very good. It is like telling others how to earn money with LinkedIn. That is basically a spiral in itself. But and that is one of those things. So people, for example, like you, right? You know so much because of your past. You can talk and refer. You can openly talk on live shows, on stage, about things. And that is your credibility. You have done that already.
But that sword cuts both ways. It's like, yes, you said, and don't get me wrong, I do agree with you. Right? Like you said, like, I have this experience, I can talk about it. But sure, I have the experience, I can talk about it. But who says that my experience applies to your context? Right? So, like, I can look at it as, don't give me advice, you've never experienced it before. Okay, I've experienced it, I'm giving you advice. But how do I now know that it applies to your experience?
Because you can explain that. This is what I meant by you can talk freely about that.
No, but okay, but that's just a thought experiment, right? But from my experience and in coaching, I would often veer off the topics where, let's say, I only experience the uptrend or a failed experiment, right? So, often people ask me, hey, Dennis, why don't you promote Scrum, right? And I usually tell them, well, I've tried a lot of alternatives, and Scrum was never better than the best alternative.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that I'm an expert in Scrum. It just means that I've tried it, and I've never succeeded it to the point where it would succeed more than an alternative that I've tried.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I have scientifically exhausted all options with Scrum, because honestly,
Yeah,
I
but
just
it
love
does. You don't need to. As long as you can say, if we are going with a non-Scrum thing, and I have done that already, and I can foresee what actually will happen, then you have exactly what I said you should have. The
Yes,
problem
but
is that many people simply don't have that.
But you see, even today, even the two of us, even though we know that sort of intuitively, we still communicate that way. We still communicate from the negative. We don't say what you should do, because that's mirroring our experience. We tell them what they shouldn't do when the bad behavior is unhealthy, right? So we don't say, oh, be a non-smoker. We say, don't smoke. And that has a purely marketing sort of psychology attached to it, right? We don't say, oh, be a non-smoker. It's cool to be a non-smoker. Because again, we don't have a term for non-smoker. The term for the positive term, right? The term for non-smoker is somebody who does not smoke, which is weird, right? Like, we don't have a default term for that, right? So we also say, don't do Scrum, like, do these other things instead. Like, we don't have a very good term for those other things. And I like referencing this sort of the vocabulary of this issue, especially in these posts that we've highlighted, but also in this idea of, like, when I'm having live sessions on TDD, and the booklet that I just released, I had a chapter in my booklet about this, like, rage baiting that's going on LinkedIn, on social media, on like this moralization of, you're a bad developer if you're doing it, or you're stupid for wasting your time, like this moralization that's going on. Because I like coming back to this basics, the simplicity in the language of, if you're not doing TDD, what do you do? I know you identify as a non-TDDer. You don't do TDD.
Yeah.
But that doesn't tell me what it is you do.
Most people can't explain.
Right?
That's a problem.
Yes, so what I like, one of the benefits that I like as a TDDer is with Sander Hugendorf, and he also doesn't identify as a TDDer, but he says we do TDD. And I can tell he knows how to do TDD, just but I saw him code. I sat next to him. I saw him code. So I don't have any, as far as Sander is concerned, I don't have any reservations whether his advice is coming from experience. Of course it is. But my point is, I find it very easy to connect with other engineers who are also TDDers, yourself included. And Nick Shoemaker, for example. It just clicks. We can sit down and we can start working on a problem, no problem. Like, without any issues. With people who don't do TDD, I don't know what their process is. And they can't explain it to me. They're like, like, sit down and
they never thought about that. So when they don't do DDD, there's a big chance that they actually don't do continuous delivery as well, which means they do something which we were talking about in the beginning. Yes. Like, no, it's not assumption, it's experience actually. So that is what I see, right?
That's not fair, but that is an
No, it's what I see. It is fair to say what I see. I see a lot of teams out there, and that is what I see.
Yeah.
So I don't say I have made a statistically thing over so many thousand surveyors. I've never done that. I will never do that. I see out there what actually happens. I see that on meetups. I see that on.
I did, and the data agrees with your assessment. Now,
yeah. So
I'm not disagreeing. I do it as well, but I'm sort of aware that it's not fair in a way.
No, why? But that's exactly what's the problem here. So we try to be. No, we should say what we think about that.
No, but because I know people who have a very good process who don't follow TDD and they do continuous delivery. And that's for the most part coming from the event modeling community, right? So Event modeling with event sourcing is a very good alternative to TDD. And it took me a very long time to realize that these are actually just a different way of putting together your development
Okay,
workflow.
you
The
didn't get what
activities
I
are very
say.
different.
Wait a second. You didn't get what I say. I don't say that people who don't do this will not do this. What I mean is their mindset is like they are so unaware of
Yeah.
their own work that they don't know they don't do TDD. They often don't know it, and they don't know about CD either. They don't know about TBD. They don't know about clean code or anything else. They just do their coding stuff and get things done and try to hide this and try to get that somehow with their branches to production. That is what I see out there.
Actually, you're right. This can be objectively analyzed. If we go back to basics, to the extreme programming loops, and you can see this, viewers. This is the C2 wiki, if you know it. So it comes from this idea that there are loops in software, and there are inner loops and outer loops. And outer loops, so there's inner loops, the compiler loop, the coding loop, the feedback loop, the integration loop, the testing loop, the deployment loop, the product feedback loop, the business viability loop, the product market fit. Like there are loops of feedback that are tied to loops of activity. And what can be objectively observed is that the outer loops are always same size or bigger than the inner loops. So when you say you're not doing TDD, and if you don't tell me a plausible alternative for what it is you are doing, I'm assuming that you are working in such a way that your inner loop is very large. So if your inner loop is very large, then you're also not practicing continuous integration. Almost guaranteed. By definition, if your inner loop is very large, you're also not doing CI. If you're not doing CI, you're not doing CD. If you're not doing CD, your deployment loops are also very large, which means your planning is unreliable, which means you lack priorities. If you lack priorities, you need tiebreakers for the prioritization. And the best tiebreaker for prioritization is estimates, right? So people are stuck estimating stuff because their priorities are unclear, because stakeholders are using the estimates as tiebreakers, right? So we have 7 things we need to work on very urgently. Okay, oh shit, what's the smallest one, right? So it immediately creates this need for lack of precision in priorities, creates need for estimates. Lack of precision in estimates creates this illusion that the priorities were correct, but the estimates weren't. When in reality, it's the priorities that need to be like crystal clear, so that there's no tiebreaker needed. And that can only work if the feedback loop on the innermost circle, which is the coding, stop coding, like keyboard moving, keyboard not moving, thinking coding, if that hat has a very tight feedback loop. The very tight feedback loop meaning 5 minutes or less. 5 minutes, 3 minutes. If you're pairing and you have a conversation in between, it's like 10, 15 minutes, right? But ultimately, it comes down to this idea, and I had a conversation with one of my clients today. It's like, how do I plan the work? And it's like, like it can happen that somebody starts working on something and then they don't move a ticket in Jira.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, well, you're thinking about it from the wrong perspective. You're thinking about it from Jira, but you need to be thinking about it from the activity loop. The activity loop is that your engineer will go to work. That's a loop. They will go to work and then they will stop the workday. Within that workday, they have unplanned work, planned work, coding, meetings, and everything that goes into like the really tertiary stuff, like going to HR or going to the bathroom or like just unrelated tangential stuff. But ultimately, you have like these little pockets of productivity that are involved with creating code, and you need to plan your activities down to that level. Like your planning cadence and your feedback cadence needs to match that. And if it doesn't, then this person needs to be empowered so they can reverse engineer all the prioritization back to their own cycle time. And if you then want to plan and prioritize bigger pockets, what you need is that you need that one small pocket scaled up very quickly to include multiple people and multiple of those small batches in a single day. But what usually people who have very large batch sizes, like a very large inner loop, they don't have multiple very small batches by multiple people multiple times per day. They have one very large batch multiple times per week or multiple times per month. And
Verdati.
then the slicing doesn't happen. So when the slicing doesn't happen, you lose control over, you lose oversight about what's going on, and then in the attempt to regain control and micromanage the batch size, which is correct, you should micromanage the batch size. The batch size should follow the shape of work, the shape of activity, and the shape of your demand for work. In order to do that, you're very prone to micromanaging the actual activity, which is, where were you? What were you doing? Rather than asking, why can't we deploy something? Like, how can we deploy a workable feature within 2 hours? Like those are not the same two things. But the level of how you get there and whether that's a conscious decision is very much up to management and prioritization and up to engineers themselves. It's like, if I want to build something, I'm thinking, what does a 2-hour step for building this look like? Because if I don't know what the answer to that is, I might not actually be able to build the whole thing. I might give up somewhere midway, where I will only realize that I'm not making progress only after I get stuck, which is a lousy way of planning work.
Good. I need to wrap up soon.
Let's wrap up.
So that's actually quite interesting for me to talk about those things. I need to become more aware of actually saving more things. And I will use the bookmark function now. LinkedIn does have one. I use it for that, actually.
Okay. Good idea. I'll do the same. And we can then exchange bookmarks.
You can save posts, actually.
Yeah, I think our next... Yeah, and then it's unsaved items. It's somewhere in the toolbar. And there... what we can do for next... So our next... This kind of LinkedIn reaction stream will be, I think... in March? End of March, I think? 20 something? Yeah, so by then, ideally, we can have like 5-6 bookmarks, and we can do this kind of episode again. Adrian, do you want to mention anything regarding your Twitch experimentation?
Wait a second, I tried to decline a call at Teams. What do you mean by Twitch?
Well, you have a new setup. You're more streaming oriented now. Is there anything you would like to share at this point?
Actually, yeah, quickly, because I actually need to go. People are already calling me. I make an announcement about that. So there will be a little bit more there will be 2 new stream types I do. The one which is relevant for the most of the people is something aligned to my YouTube channel, which is a stream which happens several times a week, probably, maybe 2 times. About tech. It is a little bit about my content, actually. So I'm talking quite long about my content, which will be then the source for my content as well, for the other stuff. So that will be on Twitch only, which means that I'll become a Twitch only streamer regarding that one. Because it doesn't work. So multi-stream simply doesn't work on no platform. That's one of the things. And we need to talk about this as well. The LinkedIn streaming isn't that great either right now. So it became worse and worse. So we might have some change there as well. And Twitch is simply the best platform to do this. And YouTube is the best platform to persist this. Right? And that is actually my new strategy there. And the other thing is I'm actually start to game again, because I have not done that for 5 years. And I have actually done that all my life. And I want to do that again, but that's not a big topic here. Okay. Yeah, that's actually it.
Cool. Looking forward to your announcement. Cool episode today, Adrian.
Likewise. Thanks a lot, mate, and see you next week then. Bye-bye, everyone.
I'm just gonna do the outro real quick, and I'll ciao, Adrian. I'm just gonna update our viewers on what they can expect next week. So next week we have one of Adrian's topics regarding continuous delivery and how to set up an app. Basically modern CI/CD tooling. And then in 2 weeks we have Nick Shumeko with test-driven development in Next.js. It's going to be a long stream, 3 hours, very practical, very like classroom style. We're hyping up the audience. Nick is prepping like a real code base, like a very realistic looking code base that he's gonna show on stream. He's gonna code on stream. He's gonna explain on stream, and Adrian and I will be moderating the probably hundreds again in chat. Last time we had like 400 people live. It was one of our biggest streams. That's happening in 2 weeks. Super excited about that. If you haven't already, check out our Substacks. So Adrian writes on Stackable CTO. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. I'm mentoring on Mentor Cruise, but that's not the link I wanted to click. I wanted to click this link. I'm writing on Crafting Tech Teams, and you can also follow me on LinkedIn. And I've just recently republished, like I did a little content and graphic, like aesthetic refresh of my no nonsense TDD booklet, where you get to experience the more human side, the sort of team resistance and team adoption cycle of new practices, of TDD, of continuous delivery in a little booklet format. So it's very easy to read, it's very quick. And if you only have like 30 seconds to read a page, you can open it up, read 2 pages, and basically learn something new. And I've written it in such a way that it's also a little bit fun. It was inspired by the Tiny MBA, which is basically the small booklet that has like actionable business insights for entrepreneurs on like a very small single page that you can sort of list through with 100 ideas. I think it has 101 ideas. That was the inspiration for it. Anyway, that's up on my LinkedIn. It's in the feature section. It's very easy to find. It's free of charge downloaded from Gumroad. I'll see you all next week. Thank you all for being with us today. See you next time. Ciao.